Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Berachot. We are up to Perek Vav Mishnah Chet. The Mishnah now is going to discuss after blessings. In the previous Mishnah, we discussed different blessings that you make on foods before you eat it. Now we're going to discuss blessings you recite after eating food. The Mishnah starts out, Achal te'enim anavim berimonim, mevarech acharein shalosh brachot, divrei Rabban Gamliel. One who eats figs, grapes, and pomegranates, Rabban Gamliel holds you have to recite shalosh brachot, the three blessings of Birkat Mazon, on those foods. Now, just as a background, in the Torah, when it speaks about the obligation of reciting Birkat Mazon, there's three psukim. First, the Torah speaks about the 7 species the land was praised on, land of Israel was praised on account of, which we said was the wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. Then the Torah speaks about bread, and then the Torah says, you ate, you were satiated, and you blessed. The following Mishnah is going to have a machloket. When this pasuk says you ate, you satiated, you blessed, what did you eat? Is it going back on the bread? Is it going back on bread and the 7 species of Israel? Or is it going on anything you ate and became satiated from? Rabban Gamliel holds it's going back on the bread and on the 7 species of Israel, that Israel was praised on account of. Now, how do we know that the first 3 brachot of Birkat Mazon are biblical? Now, the Rav and the Mefarshim explain that from this pasuk of V'achalta v'sabatu barachta et Adonai Elohecha al haaretz hatova shenatanach, we have the 3 blessings of Birkat Mazon. How? Now, V'achalta v'sabatu barachta, obviously we thank Hashem for the satiation. That's blessing number 1. The blessing of Baruch Hashem Azam v'takol. That's the first blessing. Now, when we thank Hashem for the land, we say al haaretz hatova. That's in the blessing of Nodeh. Why? Because we conclude Baruch Hashem al haaretz v'al hamazon. So that's the second blessing. Now, when we say al haaretz hatova, the good land that Hashem has granted us, hatova is in Rachem, because we end Baruch Hashem bonei Yerushalayim on account of the land. So we have the first 3 blessings of Birkat Mazon are biblical based on this pasuk of V'achalta v'sabata. The 4th blessing was enacted later on by the Chachamim after an incident in the city of Betar. The Gemara Masechet Berachot on page 48b speaks more about that. So Rabban Gamliel holds for any of the 7 species a person ate and became satiated, he recites the 3 blessings of Birkat Mazon. However, the Chachamim Omrim, the sages say, Bracha achat me'en shalosh. The sages hold that when the Torah says V'achalta v'sabata, it's going only back on the bread, the previous pasuk. It's not going back 2 psukim of bread and 7 species. It's going back just on bread. Therefore, when you eat any of the 7 species, the Chachamim say you say what we call me'en shalosh. It's 1 blessing that encompasses the first 3 blessings of Birkat Mazon. And each food of the 7 species has its own words. Meaning, if you have the 5 grains, you're going to say Baruch Hashem al michya v'al kalkala v'al tenuvat hasadeh. If you had any of the fruits that the land of Israel was praised, grapes, olives, figs, dates, pomegranates, you're going to say ala etz v'al priya etz. If you had wine, you're going to say ala gefen v'al priya gefen. Those are the 3 different of the 7 species that are in this all-encompassing blessing of me'en shalosh. That's the opinion of the Chachamim. Rabbi Akiva says, Afilu achal shelek vu mizono mevarech achalav shalosh brachot. Rabbi Akiva holds, even if a person ate cooked vegetables for satiation, that was his meal, and he became satiated, Rabbi Akiva holds you have to recite the 3 blessings of Birkat Mazon on that as well. Why? Because Rabbi Akiva holds when the Torah says V'achalta v'sabata, it's going on all foods, not only bread, not only 7 species, but all foods. And just to point out, Rabotai, when we say shalosh brachot, we really mean all Birkat Mazon. The reason the Mishnah says shalosh brachot is because that's what's biblical. But really, anytime it says shalosh brachot, it means all Birkat Mazon, which today we have the 4th and also the Achamans, etc. Those are the 3 opinions brought down in the Mishnah. Obviously, Rabotai, the halakha follows the Chachamim that in order to recite Birkat Hamazon, a person has to eat bread and be satiated. When you eat any of the 7 species, the land of Israel was praised on account of you recite Mein Shalosh, and you split it depending on what you're eating. Any other foods, a person recites the Borei Nefashot, Rabot V'Chesronan after blessing. The Mishnah concludes by teaching us a halacha regarding drinking water. Now we know water is you only usually drink water when you're thirsty, for satiation. Since you only drink water when you're thirsty, not because it has any flavor in it, the halacha is you only recite the blessing of, we'll see which blessing on water, only when you are thirsty. However, the Rav says if you're drinking water just to help the food go down your throat, you do not recite any blessing, you will just drink it. Why? Because it's not giving you any pleasure, it's just trying to get the food down your throat. Now, the Mishnah writes, that's why the Mishnah writes it specifically, Hashotem mayim litzma'o, one who drinks water to quench his thirst, specifically. Omer she'akol niya bidvaro, the Tanna Kama holds you recite the blessing of she'akol niya bidvaro before you drink the water. And afterwards you say Borei Nefashot. However, Rabbi Tarfon comes and he argues. He says you do not recite she'akol before you drink the water. You recite Borei Nefashot Rabot before you drink the water. Why? Because some explain that Rabbi Tarfon says when you make the blessing of she'akol niya bidvaro, it's only going on food that at least somewhat satiates you. However, water is not a satiating food. It's enough to warrant a blessing, but not enough, according to him, to warrant a she'akol. Therefore, Rabbi Tarfon says you must recite a Borei Nefashot Rabot before drinking water when you're thirsty. Some say a different pshat, shekivan shemayim im tzorech echachil lekiyum yoter mishar ma'achalim. They said the exact opposite. The first understanding was water is not so essential, meaning it's not as satiating. Therefore, you say Borei Nefashot and not the she'akol. Other opinions hold the exact opposite. Since water is so essential, much more than other foods, it's much too important to get the she'akol blessing. Rather, you must bless before and afterwards Borei Nefashot to show the importance of how much water is necessary. In any event, Rabotai, the Rav writes in the Mefarshim, the halacha does not follow the bitafon. Rather, when a person is thirsty for water, he recites she'akol beforehand and Borei Nefashot afterwards. That is the end of Mishnah Chet. Now, Rabotai, we begin the 7th parak, and I want to read to you just an introduction because this parak is going to teach us many new concepts. Number 1, in the Mishnah, it's going to teach us what we call in halacha zimun. I want to read to you the introduction. Mitzvat asem min haTorah levorech et Hashem la'achar achilat pat. We know that it's a biblical commandment, a mitzvah from the Torah, to bless God after eating bread. Shenemar, because what does the pasuk say? V'achalta v'sabata u'berachta et Hashem Elohecha la'aretz etova shenatanach. You ate, you were satiated, and you bless Hashem your God on account of the great land that He has apportioned you. Birkat Hamazon kolelet shalosh brachot min haTorah u'bracha nosefet midrabanan. Birkat Hamazon encompasses 3 biblical blessings and 1 rabbinical, like we stated previously. The following parak is going to discuss the obligation of zimun. The zimun obligation, which we're going to explain what it means, is placed upon a group of people that ate together. What is this concept of zimun? What we call him, one of the people in the group, he calls out his friends, he invites them or he prepares them for the Birkat Hamazon, based on the nusach we're going to see later on. This obligation of zimun is to show honor to the Creator, because it shows that all of us call out to each other that we should combine to bless God, like we know, berov am adrat melech, in a multitude of people, God is glorified. Now, bidorot harishonim, in the previous generations, in the earlier times, the custom was that after the mizamen, the leader, who would call out to his friends to join him in Birkat Hamazon, he would be the only one to recite the Birkat Hamazon out loud. Everyone around would listen, have intent to fulfill their obligation, answer amen, and they'd be yotzei dechovah. That's how they would say Birkat Hamazon. That was in previous generations. So we have the leader, he would say, Havlan v'nivrich, or Rabotai nivarech, whichever text you follow. He's going to invite the people. When everyone would be ready, he would recite Birkat Hamazon on account of everybody. They would listen and answer amen, and that's how they would do it. That was the best way to recite Birkat Hamazon. Because in this way, we gather together for the entire Birkat Hamazon. That's what we call in a multitude of people. When one person recites for many. However, the Rishonim write, already the rabbis from around 1,000 years ago, they write, in our days, already from 1,000 years till today, everyone who eats recites Birkat Hamazon to himself, because we're concerned, since Birkat Hamazon is so long, people will not focus, they will miss words, they won't pay attention, they will distract themselves, and they won't do their obligation. Therefore, even though today we have Zimun, we invite the people to get ready, everyone recites Birkat Hamazon for themselves. Most poskim hold that Birkat Hamazon is the Rabbanan. There are poskim hold otherwise, but most poskim hold that it's the Rabbanan. Now the Mishnah starts out with this obligation of Zimun. Shlosha she'achlu ke'echad, 3 people that ate as one, chayavin lizamen, they must recite the zimun. Now what the Rav writes like this: Shlosha she'achlu lizimun, lizdamen yachad, to join together, libarech belashon rabim, to bless in a plural form, nibarech she'achalnu mishelo, bless, let us bless that we ate from his. Now, Rabotai, just as an introduction, the Gemara Mesechet Berachot on page 45a learns out, Lomedet mina kituvim, it learns from the Psukim, Shera'ui lishlosha nashim litzaref kidei levarech et Hashem biyachad. It is proper for 3 people who ate a meal together to join as one to bless God. Shneimar, because the Pasuk says, Gadilu la Hashem iti, make God great with me. Let us exalt His name together. And it says also in the Torah, Ki Shem Hashem Ekra, when we call out God's name, when the name of Hashem is called out, Havu Godel Elohenu, let us give greatness to Him. Let us make it great. Hamilim Gadilu v'Havu hen belashon rabim. When the Torah keeps writing in plural, Gadilu, let us make great. Havu, let us call out. Va'aminim iti, and when it says with me or ve'ekra, when I read, that's yachid. So it's mashma that we have one person reciting and 2 people answering. That's 3. So from here the Gemara learns out that zimun minimum encompasses 3 people minimum. Now, as we see, 3 people. Right, the Mishnah writes, 3 people that ate as a group. Chayvin nizamen, they must join as one. And one person says, let us bless that we ate from his. They join together to bless God. Now, Rabotai, we have to give another introduction, because this Mishnah now is going to mention many concepts that we're not so familiar with, because we don't live in Eretz Yisrael and we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. So we're going to have to give an introduction to explain what is going on in this Mishnah. Now, we know that when produce is grown in the land of Eretz Yisrael, fruits, vegetables, or wheat, barley, a person is not allowed to partake in that food before separating certain separations. Many portions of a food, of a person's growth food, was given out to Kohanim, Leviim, poor people. Some foods had to be specifically eaten in Yerushalayim, no matter where it was grown in Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, we have to explain now each of the different tithes, portions that were given away. In order to understand a great portion of cases that will be mentioned in the Mishnah, יש להקדים ולבאר את חיובי ההפרשות המוטלים על פירות שגדלו בארץ ישראל כדי להתירם באכילה. We must explain the different types of separations of fruits that were grown in Eretz Israel in order to permit consumption. התורה מחייבת להפריש תרומות ומעשרות מהפירות הגדלים בארץ ישראל. the Torah requires a person to separate tirumot and ma'asrot from fruits that were grown in Israel b'meshech shesh hashanim harishonim lemachzor hashmita, for the first 6 out of 7 years in a shmita cycle. The fruits of the 7th year, which is the Shnat Shmita, the year when we don't work the land, piturim ma'afrashat tirumot u'ma'asrot, that year whatever grows is exempt. The 7th year we're not allowed to work the land. It's called Shanat Shmita. That year produce is exempt from giving tithes, whatever grew. We can't grow anything, we can't work the land. Whatever grows on its own from the previous year, let's say, that you planted, does not require any separations. B'chol shana mishesh shanim elu, every single year out of the 6 years, mafrishim tchilat truma gdula. The first separation that we take from our produce is truma gdula, nikret kach le'avdila mitrumat maaser. It's called trumat gdula because it differs from trumat maaser. Min Torah en la shiur. Biblically, Truma Gedola has no required measurement. Ela afilu chita achat poteret et kol hakeri. Rather, the Torah says even 1 grain will exempt the entire pile. He said umidrabanan, but however the rabbis came, they say yesh la'afrish o chelek echad mishishim, either 1/60th, o chelek echad mechamishim, o chelek echad me'arbaim, or 1/50th, or 1/40th of the produce. So from 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th. That's the Rabbanan. A person must separate. Even though biblically, all you have to do is take 1 grain out of a pile, Chachamim said a minimum amount. This first portion, either 1/40th, 50th, or 60th, that is separated, must be given to a Kohen. It is not allowed to be given to a non-Kohen. Now, once you separated this 40th, 50th, 60th of your produce and given it to a Kohen, you must separate another tithing, which we call Tiruma Gedola. Which we call Maaser Rishon. It's called Maaser Rishon. It's given to a Levi. It's 1/10 of the remainder of what you have left. So, for example, you have produce, you took out 1/50th to give to a Kohen. Whatever is the remainder of that 1/50th, you have to separate 10% and give it to a Levi. Once you take that 10% of what was left and give it to a Levi, we separate another 10%. Now it depends what year you are. If it's the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th year, 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th year, you separate what we call it's Maaser Sheni. If it's, however, the 3rd or the 6th year, it's what we call Maaser Ani. It's given to a poor person. So we have, Rabotai, it comes out, we have 3 different separations. As soon as you make the pile of the grain, you harvest your field, you make a pile, you must give either a 40th, 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th to a Kohen. Then you must give 10% of the remainder to a Levi. And then you must give 10% of the remainder of that to either, if it's the 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th year, we'll see it's called Maaser Sheni, you're going to eat it in Yerushalayim. Or if it's the 3rd and 6th year, you're going to give it to the poor people. Maaser Sheni ne'echal le'ba'alav b'Yerushalayim. Maaser Sheni, the owners eat that, whatever was grown in Yerushalayim. V'yesh bo kedusha, it has holiness. V'asur le'ochla b'tumah, therefore a person who is impure because of an emission, a seminal emission, or he touched a dead person, or tzarat, whatever impurity he has, he is prohibited from eating this Maaser Sheni. Maaser Sheni shenimtza mechutz Yerushalayim. Now let's say a person grew produce outside of Yerushalayim, in Eretz Yisrael. He grew it in Hebron, Bethlehem. He didn't grow it in Yerushalayim. Nitan livdoto bekesef. If it's too difficult to take all that produce and eat it in Yerushalayim, the 10% of the remainder, you can transfer the holiness to silver. Et kesef ma'alim b'Yerushalayim. That currency, that coin, you bring up to Yerushalayim. V'konim ba'ochel, and use that money to buy food. Hanechal b'toch Yerushalayim b'kedushat Maaser Sheni. You eat in Yerushalayim, and that'll be considered like you ate your Maaser Sheni. You're going to sell that 10%, transfer that kedushat to coins, and those coins you're going to use to buy food in Yerushalayim, and that'll be considered like you ate Maaser Sheni. Maaser Ani nitan aniyim. Obviously, we said on the 3rd and the 6th year, you give that 10% to aniyim. It's called Maaser Ani, the tithe for the poor people. Vehu chulin gmurim biyad aniyim. That has no sanctity. That's complete chulin. It's mundane. It's given to aniyim, poor people. Now, maaser rishon shenitan leLevi asur adayin ba'achila. This 10% that I gave to the Levi cannot eat it yet. Ad asher yafrish haLevi asrit mimenu. The Levi must separate 10% and give it to the Kohen. Maaser, it's called maaser mina maaser. Maaser זה שמפריש ללוי נקרא תרומת maaser, והוא ניתן לכהן. ודינו כדין תרומה גדולה. Now you took a 60th off your field and give it to a Kohen. 10% of what was remainder you gave it to a Levi. The Levi cannot eat it yet. He must take 10% of what he got and give it to the Kohen. After the Levi gave this 10% to the Kohen, whatever remainder the Levi has, it's considered mundane, and anyone can eat that portion. If any of these tithes weren't taken out, like the halacha requires, it's what we call an halachat tevel. Tevel cannot be eaten. Tevel comes out, it's a combination of the words tov lo, meaning lo tov. It's no good, meaning you can't eat it. That is prohibited to be eaten. The Mishnah now is going to discuss a person who ate these different foods that weren't tithed. We're going to discuss different cases. Or we're going to discuss, the Mishnah is going to discuss right now different types of foods that a person ate, when he can join the zimun, and when he can't join the zimun. The Mishnah starts out by writing like this: Achal demai, a person who ate demai, u'maaser rishon shenitla trumato, u'maaser sheni ve'ekdesh shenivdu, ve'hashama she'achal kazayit ve'akuti mezamnin alehem. We have to explain these cases, Rabotai. Achal demai, a person who ate demai. What is demai? The Mefarshim write like this: Hagmara Memesechet Sotah on page, the Gemara Memesechet Sotah page 48a, Misaperet, it says over an event. Yochanan the Kohen Gadol, Shalach Shlichim Bechol Gvul Yisrael. He sent messengers to all the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. Livdok im makpidim al frashat trumot u'maasrot, to search, to investigate, are the Jewish people being careful, strict, scrupulous on the separating of trumot and maasrot. He found out that everybody separates the first portion to the Kohen. However, some of the ignoramuses, the unlearned people, they wouldn't separate the other two, the 10% to the Levi, and then the 10% of the remainder to either the poor people or to the eating in Eretz Yisrael. Everyone would do the 10% to the Kohen. The problem was there were certain people that wouldn't do the other two separations. Lefikach, therefore, Itkin, Yochanan HaKohen Gadol established, Shalokeach perot me'am, one who buys fruits from an ignoramus, Chayav la'afrisha maaser rishon or maaser sheni or maaser ani. He must take the 10% of what he has and give it to a Levi, and the 10% of the remainder to a poor person or to eat in Yerushalayim. These fruits that you got from an amaretz that you're not sure if it was separated properly, it's called demai. It's a combination of the words damai in Aramaic, which in Hebrew means zemahu. What is the status of these fruits? Are they separated or not? So we gave it the name demai. Achal demai, the Mishnah teaches us here. HaMishnah melamedet she'adam she'achal pat shel demai, a person who ate bread made out of grain that was taken from Ha'aretz, demai. Mizamnin alav. He is counted in the zimun. Klomar, meaning to say, hu mitztaref lechiyuv zimun. He's part of our group. Va'apal pi shebederech klal en achilat isur afilu isur midrabanan mechebet b'zimun. Even though we know a rule, anybody who eats anything prohibited, even rabbinically, the Mishnah is going to say later on, is disqualified for a zimun. Meaning, two people ate bread that was kasher, one person ate bread that was not kasher. That one person cannot join the two people in zimun. So the Mishnah is teaching us here, even though demai is not, you have to first separate before you eat it. Nevertheless, mikol makom ha'ochel demai mitzaref lezimun. One who eats the demai is part of the zimun. Hatam lekach, the reason being, mipnei she'isur demai, the prohibition of demai, kal yoter mishar isurim, it is much more lighter than the other prohibitions. Sheken rov ha'me'aretz me'asrim et peroteim karui, because really most ignoramuses did separate. Only a minute amount, a less than majority amount, weren't careful. Therefore, the sages say that we are allowed to feed poor people demai, meaning since the prohibition of demai is only a worry, a concern, it's a stringency, because we're afraid that maybe the Me'aretz didn't separate for the Levi and for the Anir for Yerushalayim. The Chachamim were lenient on poor people. They did not rule on them this prohibition of demai, therefore we can give them demai. And now, unbelievable. The Gemara tells us that any person, even a wealthy person, he can make all his property ownerless, thereby making himself considered a pauper, and he can eat that food because he's allowed now in demai. Therefore, demai is not called a prohibited food because anyone can technically eat it if he does this loophole by making himself a pauper. It's considered a food that is allowed to be eaten. So the Mishnah teaches us here that one who ate demai is included in a zimun. The Mishnah continues, U'ma'aser rishon shenitla trumato, which it means or a person who ate bread made out of maaser rishon that tumat maaser was separated, which we'll explain like this. After you take the 10% from the portion that the Levi received, one second. Yes, after you separate the 10% from the portion that the Levi received, it is considered completely mundane. It's allowed to be eaten by anybody. So the Gemara asks, what exactly is the Mishnah teaching me by saying that Maaser Rishon, that you took out the Tumah, you're allowed to be part of a Zimun? Meaning like this, Rabotai. 10% was given to the Levi. That Levi now separated 10%. That 10% can be eaten by anybody. It's called mundane. Anybody could eat it. So what's the Mishnah telling me here? Oh, by the way, if you ate the 10% that was taken from a Levi's portion, you could be part of Zimun. Obviously, it's allowed. Therefore, the Gemara answers that there's a chidush in the Mishnah's case. Haklal, the rule is, always you must first separate 10% for the Kohen, and afterwards 10% to the Levi of the remainder. Let's say the owners flipped the order. First they gave the 10% to the Levi. נמצא שכהנים זכו לקבל ממעשר זה תרומה גדולה מלבד הזכות הרגילה של מעשר ממעשר שיש לכהנים מעשר ראשון. Now the Kohanim can come and claim two portions. Instead of the Kohanim taking their 1/60th and now going to a Levi and taking a 10th of what he has left, I'm going to go straight to the Levi and take two portions. 10% for my portion and 10% of what you have to give me. הלוי שקיבל את המעשר הראשון מן הבעלים, חייב איפה להפריש מן לתרומה גדולה כראוי, ועוד 20 מהנותר לתרומת מעשר. This Levi now must separate two portions, 10% to the Kohen and 10% again to the Kohen. והנה, חובת הפרשת תרומות ומעשר לא חלה על תבואה עד שידושו אותה. The obligation of separating תרומה and מעשר is only after it was threshed. יפרידו את הגרעינים מן המוץ, they separated the grain from the stalk. יערימו אותם להרימה, they piled it up and they made a heap. They also היינו יחליקו את פניה, they smoothened it out. That's when the obligation of תרומה and מעשר comes. However, אם הפרישו תרומות ומעשרות מן התבואה מיד לאחר שנקצרה, let's say they separated 10% right after they harvested, meaning they didn't remove the grain from the kernel, they didn't pile it. As soon as they harvested, they took out 10%. חלה הפרשה, the separation works. אפילו אם לא נגמרה עדיין מלאכת כינוס התבואה, even though they didn't finish gathering it, they just harvested. הגמרא דורשת מן הכתוב, the Gemara learns out from the pasuk, שבמקרה כזה, in this situation when the owners harvested and separated, שהלוי הקדים ונטל מעשר ראשון כשהייתה התבואה עדיין בשיבולים, לפני שהופרשה מהם תרומה גדולה, this Levi that went and took his 10% before the 10% was given to the Kohen, פטור ממעשר זה מתרומה גדולה. The Levi is exempt, meaning like this. In general, we say after harvesting, after gathering, after removing the kernels from the stalks, 10% is given to the Kohen, and then 10% is given to the Levi, and the Levi gives 10% of that to the Kohen. However, let's say they harvested right away and they separated. The Levi took his 10%. The Levi now does not have to give 10% to the Kohen. Why? Because the Torah calls it Ma'aser mina Ma'aser. The Levi gives Ma'aser from Ma'aser. However, let me just read it inside. Patur Ma'aser ze mitruma gdola. This Ma'aser, this 10% the Levi got is exempt from 10% to the Kohen. V'hainu, meaning, Shalevi chayav lafrish esrit min ha'ma'aser tumat ma'aser. The Levi can give his 10% to the Kohen, but the Levi doesn't have to give the original 10% that the owner had to give. Meaning, the Levi has to give his 10%, but he doesn't have to give the owner's 10%. That's what our Mishnah is discussing. The Mishnah is coming to tell us that you have grain that only 10% was taken from the Levi's portion to the Kohen, but the original 10% wasn't taken. In the case of the Mishnah is when it was harvested and separated right away to the Levi. So the Mishnah is teaching us somebody who eats bread made from this grain can be part of a zimun. Why? Because this bread is allowed, even though it wasn't separated properly, it's allowed to be in. So in conclusion, Rabotai, this case of Maaser Rishon Shenitla Tumato is discussing a situation where grain was harvested and separated to the Levi right away. The Levi gave 10% to the Kohen from his portion, but not from the owner's original portion. Meaning the Kohen only got 10% when he shouldn't have gotten 10%. In this case, it is perfectly allowed the food to be eaten because the obligation to give the Kohen Maaser begins upon the completion of the gathering, harvesting, threshing. But if you harvested and gave right away to the Levi has no obligation to give 10% of the owner's portion to the Kohen. He gives 10% of his own portion. So if a person made grain, ate bread made out of this grain, he can be part of a zimun. U'maaser sheni ve'ekdesh shenivdu. The Mishnah moves on to the next case of maaser sheni and hekdesh that were transferred over, meaning Abotai, I'll explain the case. מעשר שני שנפדה במעות יוצא לחולין ומותר באכילה לכל אדם בכל מקום. מעשר sheni that was transferred over to money, it is considered mundane. It could be eaten anywhere and it could be given to anybody. Meaning, I have grain right now that I have to separate 10% to eat in Yerushalayim. I transferred the sanctity of this food onto coins. Those coins I have to buy food in Yerushalayim and eat it. This food, however, becomes mundane. Anybody can eat this food anywhere. Why? Because I transferred over the sanctity from this food onto the coins. Kamoken, likewise, hamakdish ma'achal lebet mikdash lebedek habayit. Somebody right now donated food to the Bet HaMikdash, to the communal fund. Nitan lifdoto bekesef or bechafetz acher b'sheve kesef. He can transfer that sanctity onto money or another item. Now that food that you promised for the Bet Mikdash becomes secular again. And now the one that you transferred it on, that becomes holy. A person who wants to get this loophole of transferring the sanctity of his Maaser Sheni onto coins, or of his communal fund donation he gave onto coins, must add 1/5 of the total amount. So if you took, let's say, $10 worth of produce and transferred it on to coins to Yerushalayim, you have to give on top of the $10 1/5 of the $10, meaning 1/4 of the $10 you must add on top of it in order to pay off your Maaser Sheni or your Hekdesh. The Mishnah now is talking about a case where the person did not do it properly. He transferred over the sanctity of his Maaser Sheni onto the coins, but he didn't add the 1/5. Now, even though he didn't add the 1/5, the Mishnah teaches us that this adding of the 1/5 is not, if you didn't do it, it's not the end of the world. Therefore, somebody who ate this Maaser Sheni, this Maaser Sheni food that the sanctity was taken out of it, he could be part of a zimun. Meaning, in essence, if you did not separate properly the sanctity from this Maasel Sheni onto the coins, this Maasel Sheni would be holy food. It can only be eaten in purity in Yerushalayim. Since you transfer over the sanctity of this food onto the coins, the food can be eaten anywhere. Even though the Mishnah teaches us, even though you separated the sanctity onto the coins, but you didn't add the 1/5 like you were required, nevertheless, you're still allowed to eat this food anywhere, in any place, and therefore a person who ate it can be considered part of a zimun. The Mishnah goes on to another case of the waiter who was serving the people who ate a kazayit. Now, what's a chidush in this case? In general, you have to have a zimun when 3 people are eating together as a group. The Mishnah here is teaching us that even though the shamash, the waiter, was not sitting in the group, he was constantly going back and forth serving, he is considered part of the zimun. Why? Because that's how he eats. That's his set way of eating, by walking back and forth while he serves. The Mishnah teaches us, therefore, he is unique. Even though he wasn't sitting with us, he was walking back and forth, he can be part of the zimun. He's actually obligated to be part of the zimun. Va'kuti, and the Mishnah goes on to say, ekuti, mizamnin alehem, he also is obligated in zimun. Now what is a kuti, Rabotai? Hakutim hayu obdei kochavim she'avu le'eretz Yisrael mikuta. Kutim were a sect, a group of people that were brought to Eretz Yisrael from Kuta, u'mimekomot nosefim al yedei melech Ashur, and from other places to the king of Ashur. Shoshibam ba'arei Shomron, he put them in the mountains in the cities of Shomron, La'achar shugalu misham aseret hashvatim, after the 10 tribes were exiled from there. Me'achar shelo hayu yireim et Hashem, since these people that the melech Ashur put in the Arei Shomron weren't God-fearing, shilach Hashem ba'em arayot sheyu ogim ba'em. Hashem sent a plague of lions that were devouring, that were harming them. Ube'akvut zot hem itgairu. Because of their concern for the lions, they decided to convert. They hoped and because they'll convert, they'll be saved from the punishment. Hem shamru al mitzvot המפורשות בכתוב, והיו מדקדקים במצוות שהחזיקו בהן יותר מישראל. It says that they actually kept the explicit laws in the Torah, and they were more scrupulous in mitzvot. The mitzvot they decided to keep, they were even more scrupulous than the Jewish people. Our Mishnah holds that they were gerei emet. Our Mishnah this time holds that they're considered good conversion. Their conversion was valid. And they're considered Jewish people. Therefore, a kuti that joined in a meal with 2 other Jews who ate the bread is obligated to be part of the zimun. Ulam, however, there is an Tana that argues. There is another opinion that holds they're not considered Jews. They're what we call gerei arayot. They converted on account of the lions, meaning they did not convert because they wanted to, out of a full heart. And since they didn't really want to convert, they're not considered converts, they're considered goyim. Our Tana is coming to tell us that no, a kuti mizamnin alehem, he is part of the zimun, he is considered a full Jew. Bitkufa meucheret yoter, later on in the generations, badku achrei akutim, they searched the lineage of the Kutim, umatzu shayu obdim lidmut Yonah berosh har gerizim. They found that they were serving the image of a dove. They were bowing down to it on the top of the mountain of Gerizim. They decreed upon them that they're considered full non-Jews. Therefore, nowadays, din kuti ki din oved kochavim sheno mitzaref lezimun. The law of a kuti is considered like the regular law of a goy, that he's not considered part of a zimun. That was the first part of the Mishnah, Rabotai. Now the Mishnah goes on to discuss foods that were eaten that will prohibit you from reciting the zimun. Achal tevel, a person who ate tevel. Tevel is fruits that the trumot and masot were not separated. You didn't give 10% to the Kohen. That 10% was, the remainder wasn't given to a Levi. The remainder of that 10% wasn't given over to either eaten in Yerushalayim or to a poor person. That is a suit to be in. It's called tevel, which we said tav la, which is lo tov. You're not allowed to eat it. The Mishnah is telling us here. Obviously, we know that you're not allowed to eat tevel. It's a straight prohibition. So what's the Mishnah saying? By the way, if you ate tevel, you can't be part of a zimun. I knew that. It's like saying if you ate pig, you can't be part of a zimun. So what's the chidush of the Mishnah? The chidush of the Mishnah is regarding tevel drabanan. Kigon, for example, shegadal batzis sheno nakuv. The produce grew in a flower pot that wasn't perforated, because we know sheken min Torah biblically En chayvim bitrumot u'masrot ele perot eretz Yisrael shegadlu bekarka. Produce that grew in Israel is only obligated in Trumot HaMazon when it grew on the land. Or it grew in a flower pot that was perforated, therefore it was getting nourishment from the ground of Israel. That because it's getting nourishment from the ground of Israel. However, produce that was grown in the land of Israel in a flower pot that was not perforated, meaning it was not getting satiation from the ground of Israel, you have to separate tithes only rabbinically from those foods. The Mishnah is teaching us that even that food, if you ate grain from that, if you ate bread made out of that grain that rabbinically was obligated in separation, so you didn't separate, you cannot be part of a zimun. The Mishnah goes on to say another case of Ma'aser Rishon, meaning the Mishnah is telling us, the Mishnah here is talking about a case where you did make the pile. Previously we spoke about when the owner harvested and right away he separated 10% to the Levi when he wasn't obligated to give anything to the Kohen yet. The Mishnah now is telling us a case where he did harvest, made a pile, he threshed the grains out of the stalks. Now he actually is obligated to give to the Kohen. The Mishnah is telling us since now he actually was obligated to give to the Kohen, that 10% that he gave the Levi is not exempt. You still have to give it to the Kohen. Somebody who ate from that grain before 10% of that grain was given to the Kohen, ate prohibited food, he cannot be part of a zimun. Meaning, to make it more clear, 10% I gave to the Levi. The Levi was supposed to separate 10% of that to the Kohen. If he didn't, that grain, if you ate bread from it, it was asur, you cannot be part of a zimun. That's what the Mishnah is telling us. Ma'aser Rishon shelo nitlat turmato. Ma'aser Rishon, the 10% that you gave to the Levi, that 10% of that was not given over to the Kohen. U'ma'aser sheni b'hekdesh shelo nivdu. Likewise. Sorry, Rabotai, for the change of scenery. The battery was low. Baruch Hashem. So we're continuing. U'ma'aser sheni b'hekdesh shelo nivdu. Likewise, if a person ate grain that came from Ma'aser Sheni or Hekdesh that were not separated, the sanctity was not transferred over properly, that's also, so let us explain again. Ma'aser Sheni is 10% of the produce was given to the Kohen, 10% of the remainder was given to the Levi, and 10% of the remainder was eaten in Yerushalayim on years 1, 2, 4, and 5. That food, we said, has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. If you don't want to eat in Yerushalayim, you have to transfer it over to a specific type of coin. Now, if a person did that process incorrectly, that food that you were supposed to transfer sanctity over is prohibited to be eaten outside of Yerushalayim. If you did, you cannot be part of the zimun. That's what the Mishnah is telling us. Likewise, hekdesh means I said this grain is donated to the Beit HaMikdash. I made it holy. Now you cannot partake in it anymore. The halacha is, the Torah says you can exempt yourself. You take the value of that grain plus a fifth of its value and you transfer it over to the money, and that goes to the Beit HaMikdash. That food now can be eaten anywhere. If a person didn't do that process correctly either, that food is asur to be eaten. You cannot be part of a zimun. Now let us explain how you could do this process incorrectly. Ma'aser sheni efshar livdoto rak al matbea sheyesh alav tzura. Ma'aser sheni can only be exchanged onto a coin that has an image. Dahainu, meaning shemutbat alav tzura melamedet al erko, that it has a image on it that signifies its value. V'kach nitan lishtamesh bo kematbea over hasocher, meaning you'd have to transfer it over to gold and silver wouldn't be good enough. It has to be a type of currency, that a coin that you could see how much the value is worth. We learn out this halakha from the Torah writes regarding Ma'aser Sheni, V'tzalta kesef biyadecha, the money must be bound to your hand. Mikan, we learn from here, shakesef shepodim bo Ma'aser Sheni tzarich liot matbea im tzura. V'tzalta, they learn out, it has to have an image, the money that you're transferring over the sanctity to. Now, if you did not do it correctly, you transferred it over to a coin that does not have this image, that food cannot be eaten outside of Yerushalayim. If it was, you cannot make a zimun with that person. Ubenogel hekdesh, likewise by hekdesh. Aval pish en tzarich livdoto davka al matbea, even though you don't have to transfer over your hekdesh, the donation, over onto a coin. Mikol makom, nevertheless, yesh livdoto al mitatirim lo al karka. Nevertheless, you cannot transfer over the sanctity onto land. You can only transfer the sanctity onto tangible property. Like the Gemara on page 47b learns out from the Pasuk. Therefore, the Mishnah is teaching us Ma'aser Sheni that was transferred over the sanctity onto a coin that has no image, or Hekdesh, this donation that you transferred over onto land. Since you transferred over the sanctity incorrectly, they're considered that it wasn't transferred. That food cannot be eaten, either Hekdesh at all or the Ma'aser Sheni outside Yerushalayim. Anyone who ate it cannot be part of a zimun. The Mishnah continues, V'ashamash sha'achal pachot mikazayit, the waiter that ate less than the kazayit, meaning in the case when we said he was allowed, he ate a kazayit. This case now Mishnah is saying he didn't eat the kazayit when he was walking back and forth, therefore he cannot join because the minimum amount is a kazayit. The Mishnah didn't really have to say this, we knew it was kazayit, it's just trying to parallel the first cases that we had. The Mishnah ends off, V'anochri, and the non-Jew, and Mizamnin Alav, he cannot join to be in a zimun. Obviously, we know, Rabotai, again, that a non-Jew cannot be part of a zimun. He cannot join together because he's not chayav in bekat mazon. How can he join zimun if he's not chayav in bekat mazon? Therefore, there must be a deeper chidush. That's why the Mefarshim tell us that, based off the Gemara, that the Mishnah here is talking about a goy that started the conversion process. He already had his circumcision. He already learned everything he has to learn. However, he did not dip himself in the mikveh, in the purifying water. The Mishnah is teaching us, as long as he did not purify himself in the mikveh, he's considered a full goy and he cannot join zimun. You cannot tell me, oh, he learned, he even had brit milah, he's almost there, therefore we could put him in zimun. Chazal say, no. He has to have the full conversion, which includes the mikveh, dipping in the mikveh. If he did not dip in the mikveh, he cannot join in the zimun. They cannot be part of it. It comes out from the Mishnah, Rabotai. We learned 3 rules regarding zimun. You cannot join if you ate or somebody ate prohibited food, not kosher food. You cannot join if you ate less than a kazayit, which we hold is 27 grams. And a goy cannot join even if he's almost done with his conversion, so long that he did not dip. That is the rule that comes out from this Mishnah, Rabotai. I know it was long and it had many concepts. I hope I explained it to you as best as I could. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.